Welcome to this episode of Building Wealth and Mental Health. We have a special guest today, Dr. Jesmond Fair. He has a unique background. He actually went out on his own, but I think his journey to where he is today is going to be something that inspires a lot of people. Welcome today.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Awesome. As we get into this, can you please describe the population you serve today and how you describe your organization?
Definitely. So, the population I serve is primarily individuals who identify as Black or someplace on the LGBTQ spectrum. More broadly, I do see people of color and people who don't identify in either of those groups, but that's really what our target focus is. And even within those individuals, I see people who are looking to address things like trauma, things like mood disorders. So that would be like anxiety, depression, bipolar. And also I do a lot of identity work. So anything related to sexual identity, religious identity, any of those. And then I also do a lot of couples work. So if anybody's looking for like marriage counseling, premarital counseling, even if you aren't married, just couples coming in. I also see traditional couples like polycules, things like that. People who identify as polyamorous. So I see them as well. And my practice is also kink affirming. So those are the people that I primarily see. And then as far as my practice goes, I was very intentional about creating a space for people who look and identified like me. For one, representation is important, and Black doctors make up Black male doctors make up about 1% of the actual licensed psychologists out there. We make up a very small percentage, and actually that might be even smaller because I think that's just Black psychologists overall. And so it's not a lot of people who look like me who are doing therapy, and there are a lot of people now with the way things are moving, especially Black people, Black men who are getting into therapy. They want therapists to identify as them. To be honest, it's few and far between. And so I wanted to definitely make sure I created a space where men could be heard, Black people could be heard, women could be heard. However you identify, you could be heard, you could be seen as somebody who's not only culturally competent, but also intentionally incorporates that into the practice. So you can create a space that you can feel comfortable letting your guard down, being who you are, and talking through those things that are unseen, personal, and vulnerable in a safe environment. And also, the other part of my practice that is in development now is going to be a bit of training. And so, as I continue to progress, I'm looking to expand to include other clinicians, maybe a postdoc, some interns, practicum students, and really focusing in on people of color, working with people of color. There's not a lot of Black people in the field, so definitely priority will go to Black people, and I will say that proudly. But also just expanding it to people of color who are wanting to learn how to competently work with other people of color in this field.
Yeah, while we're on that topic, is there a contact information they can reach out to you if somebody is interested in practicing in that area?
Yeah. You can reach me, all of my social media, contact information, everything can be found on my website. It's www.thevillageparadigm.org. And Paradigm is Paradigm. I know that can trip some people up sometimes because it's not spelled like it's said, but yeah, so you can find me again, www.thevillageparadigm.org.
How would you describe your patient load? How many patients do you see in a given week? What is your goal of a patient load? And how do you manage, not being burnt out, things of that nature?
Great question. I'm actually going to do that with my patient load and then go into what I'm currently seeing. So before I went full-time private practice, I was working for the VA. I will also be very intentional in saying the specific department within the VA that I was working in is called general mental health. I don't recommend it to anybody. It's a recipe for burnout. I had on my caseload there 300 plus people. I was actively seeing about 150 to 200 of them. And so from a numbers perspective, people were being seen on average about 6 to 8 weeks, once every 6 to 8 weeks. That's not what therapy is. That's not what therapy looks like. It was essentially case management. But that was also the nature of that particular department within the VA. That was, I was there for 2 years, was licensed for one, and I was like, I can't do this. Like, I'm already burning out and I'm just starting in my career. So I left there and decided to go full-time private practice. I now see on average about 15 clients a week. My goal was I was intentional about the amount of people I was seeing. So I created a budget for what I needed to do to maintain my lifestyle. So I was like, if my current rates, if I could see at least 10 people at my full rate, I would have what I need to be able to survive and not be living paycheck to pay. I'm averaging about 15, so I'm actually surpassing my goal. I don't, my cap 20 per week. I haven't really seen that. I've had 2 weeks where I've had about 20 per week, but on average, I see about 15 people a week. And that's allowing me to actually live more comfortably than I did when I was working for the VA. Burnout is decreased tremendously because I'm not seeing nearly as many people, and I control my schedule because I set my own hours, and that also works for me because with the VA, I had to be there. First person I was being seen was like 8 o'clock in the morning. I've never been a morning person. Now my first person, the earliest they can come in is at 10, but I don't mind going as late as 8. And so for me, and that's 8 p.m. I don't mind that. I like that. And also people work. So I wanted to make sure that my practice provided them space that if you want to come after work or whatever you could. That's actually really popular hours at 5 to 8 time frame. And so that allows me to do what I need to do. I'm not worried about being burnt out, and I'm allowed, and I'm giving service to people who need it.
Very good. So let's go back, way back. Can you describe your childhood? How was life like back then, all the way up to your high school years? If somebody were to describe who you are or who you were back then, how would they describe you?
Oh, okay, let's do it. So I was a church boy through. I was a country church boy. So I grew up in a little town called Beauregard, Alabama. People probably never heard of unless you were driving by. The closest thing people would probably know is Auburn because of Auburn University. It's still Roll Tide, by the way, but Auburn University was like right next door to us. I was in what they call the country part of Auburn and Opelika. They were sister towns. So grew up on a farm. My grandparents had a farm, and we had livestock. So there was cows, chickens, and the pigs and everything. I was one of the younger grandchildren, so by the time I came along, they were starting to slow that down a bit. But even then, for most of my childhood, they still had livestock. We also had acres of corn, green beans, collard greens, okra, purple hull peas, squash, watermelon, whatever they decided to plant. So I am not a stranger to manual labor, even though I am very averse to it at this point in my life, mostly because of a long period of time. If you saw a little bit of Jesmond, he was this country boy who was in church every Sunday. Grandfather was a deacon, mom was in the choir, I was in the choir. Grandmother was on the missionary board, usher board. We were in Sunbeam and Crusader, so very, very active in the church. And I was also very involved academically, so I was always on honor roll. I was always doing something related, so I started piano lessons when I was in like second or third grade. And then I was playing by ear and eventually started playing for my uncle's church. He was a pastor. And then my home church a little bit later. I was in a band in middle school. I was in band in high school. I was actually drum major for all 4 years of high school, little known fact. And that was pretty much like my life. It was music, church, and farm. Like that was me. Another thing that was really important is I ended up around the eighth grade year. My grandfather had a stroke, and so I ended up staying and helping my grandmother take care of him. And so I was pretty much over there. I would go, come back, help take care of him, get him ready for bed and everything, do homework and stuff. And it was interesting because during high school years, it was navigating that while being in the band, doing homework, National Honor Society, all these organizations. I was very involved in school. And also, we had a schedule of making sure grandfather got his appointments and everything. And looking back on it, I was honestly really busy, but it worked out. And I like it was just for me, but to talk about it, and I was like, I was actually doing quite a bit, just from all the roles I was navigating, which most children didn't have to worry about. It was like they were just going to school and doing what they had to do. But I had this additional piece of also having to take care of my grandfather. Um, and I did that all the way up until I graduated, and then went to the University of Alabama. But that was pretty much what my life was: this young country church kid who was super into music, and very involved in his family, school, and community. Yeah.
So because I'm from the South, I can't just slide by you being a drum major for 4 years straight. A drum major has a lot to do with skill, but a lot to do with politics.
Mm-hmm.
How were you able to achieve that feat?
Great question. Our band was unique in that the I auditioned for drum major. Um, it was coming up. We started in sixth grade, so we could march. No, we started seventh grade. So you can march your seventh and eighth grade years. So it gave us 2 years, and then you can march all through your high school because our band was just combined. Our schools, the way our schools work, that's how the bands were combined at that time. And so I had 2 years under my belt by the time I was coming into high school. But somebody else actually got the drum major spot, which was fine. The band director that we had left, and when he left, our band shrunk.
Mhm.
And so the person who did get drum major ended up quitting. And so they were like, okay, well, who's the runner up? And so I was the person who was second. And so that's how I ended up being drum major my freshman year. And then from there, it just continued on. We actually went through, I think, three band directors during my tenure. And so I was one of the more consistent pieces of that portion of the band because I was there. I was able to build people's trust. Our band went through a lot of transition. There was some shrinking, some growing. And so that was a very unique opportunity for me just to be able to be a part of that, but also very challenging because, like I said, we had like three different band directors at the time. And so it was chaotic a bit, rewarding, exciting. And also, I learned a lot about leadership. I was pushed in ways that I was not expected to, and came away with some great memories, but also learned some valuable skills as far as like how to navigate challenges. So yeah.
In high school, what was your exposure to mental health, and what did you think about the mental health space in general?
So for reference, I graduated high school in 2006. So my high school years are about 2002, 2006 ish. Um, I knew nothing about mental health. We, again, small town, they weren't talking about mental health. It wasn't even like just from, because people talk about like in the Black community, this is something that they're starting to talk about. I didn't even hear my white friends talking about therapists and everything. Like therapy wasn't even something that we knew anything about in my town. So mental health and everything wasn't anything that I even thought about until I got into college. That was my first exposure to mental health. That was my first exposure to anything related to psychology, counseling, any of that. Like I didn't know any of that honestly existed until I got to college.
Mm. So you're in high school, and now you have to decide the college to go to. Auburn's right next door. You decided to go a different path. How did you think about college, and how did you decide the college that you wanted to go to?
I do not recommend this, but this is how I did it. I knew I didn't want to go out of town, out of state. So that left all of the in state schools. At the time, I did not feel like, I'm gonna be real transparent. I did not feel like me coming from a predominantly white school that I could handle HBCU. And so I did not, I automatically took all the HBCUs off the table. Ironically enough, my mom graduated from HBCU, my aunt graduated from HBCU, and my uncle graduated from HBCU. But for me, I was like, no. So I was like, okay. And I was like, I don't like Auburn and it's too close to home. So the only school that left was Alabama. So I really picked my school based on the fact that I was like, it had to be in state. There were only two schools I was going to decide between Auburn and Alabama. And I only applied to Alabama and I got in, thankfully. And so that's how I made my choice. As far as like what I was majoring in, I actually came in as a music major because the other part of that is my school's counselor who was in charge of the college prep piece was subpar at best. And so there was a lot that I did not know. Worked extensively with like college prep students and different organizations in college and everything. And so if I had the knowledge now that I had then, or if I had the knowledge then that I have now, I probably would still chosen Alabama, but I definitely would have gone about it in a different way. A lot of this just was pure luck. I loved music, so I was like, I guess I'll go in as a music major. I didn't even know I had to audition for the School of Music. I didn't find out till it was like the week or something before I was going to orientation. I was like, oh yeah, have you said your audition? I was like, audition for what? I didn't even realize it was a process for any of that. So that gives you a bit of insight into just how quote unquote prepared I was. Mm-hmm. And so even though I wasn't a first generation student, and there very much so some things that were first generation for me, and or some first experiences, I'll say not first generation, first experiences. And so yeah, it was a lot of happenstance and I was very self-motivated. And so scholarships and stuff, I was good on finding that. But as far as like navigating college, a lot of that was just trial and error.
On a side note, how much do you think people, let's say, struggle because they receive poor career advice in your practice that you see? Because I know in my practice, I see a lot of spending habits is developed through, I don't like what I do. So for somebody who was probably initially not given the best advice to somebody who sees people who may not be in the right career field for them, what is your thoughts on that?
Great question. So that's honestly a lot of the work that I end up doing because I talk to so many people. Like I have people who are lawyers, doctors, teachers, accountants, like you name it. And to your question, you asked me earlier about managing burnout. Some of the people are managing burnout not because their job is too demanding, but it's because it's not aligned with who they are or their values. And so they're having to show up to work and put on this facade every day and pretend to be somebody that they're not to fulfill this position that's paying the bills. And then also because of capitalism, it's like, well, this job pays really well and I'm not trying to do anything else. And they've also been like, well, you have to do X to get Y, and you can't always make money doing things that you love. And a lot of that honestly just comes from people not knowing how to monetize the things that they are like that they consider hobbies or their passions or whatever that might be. And so to your point, as far as like bad career advice, there is not enough emphasis on how versatile and lucrative a lot of careers outside of the ones that people just happen to know. Like everybody knows, oh, okay, you need to go. They've added IT in there now because people recognize the importance of technology. But a lot of times it's like, oh, you need to be a doctor, you need to be a lawyer. And if they hear of something outside of those major fields or anything within the business field, it's like, oh, you ain't gonna make no money in that. And I was like, well, maybe, depending on what I end up doing. But that's also, is money a value of mine? Mm-hmm. And so that's been a huge issue. Just horrible advice, honestly, uninformed advice, people who aren't even exploring the options out there. There's, especially with the way social media is set up, entrepreneurs. The other thing that people don't talk about is college isn't the only way to make money these days. Like it's honestly not even necessary depending on what you're going into. Mm-hmm. I tell people all the time, I was like, you honestly need to see, are there certificates that you could get? The trades field are booming, but people aren't really talking about those as much or not looked upon, especially considering how much expensive college is. I was I literally taught a class on academic and career planning, and I was in there with people who were actively in college telling them, if you don't need a college degree, don't get it. Like, don't waste your time, don't waste your money. It's a Ponzi scheme. I didn't like it. I was like, I'm here because I have to be. I can't do what I need to do without this degree. That is a fact. This field didn't start until the entry level for us is a master's degree. That's the case for every other field. So honestly, figuring out what you want to do and like, is this something that's necessary is vastly more beneficial, and it will help align. You can monetize that, and there are ways that people are doing that. And thanks to social media, you can find people in groups that can show you how to do that work. And so, yes, I definitely feel like people would experience less burnout, less fatigue, less depression, anxiety, all these different things I'm seeing in my practice if they had careers that align more with who they are, what they value, and the things that they're interested in.
I appreciate you providing your insight on that. Now, you're in college. You haven't been exposed. You're a Southern boy like myself, and mental health was just not a thing. We didn't even consciously think about it. But now you're in college. You're studying music. When did mental health come to your consciousness? And also, how did you swallow the pill of the amount of years you would have to be in school to become a mental health professional?
There was a lot of denial. I'm gonna tell you that now. So I started out freshman year as a saxophone. My principal was saxophone, alto sax. I was a music major. I figured out about 1 to 2 months into my first semester freshman year that music was not what I wanted to do professionally. I still am a musician, and I actually done it professionally. I was like, this can't be my bread and butter because I love it, but I recognized very quickly for me to be successful in this, the amount of practice that needed to be done, the way in which I needed to navigate this space would then make this something that I hated. And I figured that out because I was like, with the amount of practice you're asking me to do just for the major, I was like, this ain't, I was also on an instrument that wasn't quite a passion for, because even though I came in as a saxophone person, piano was more so where my bread and butter was, and then also voice, but I didn't even think about voice because that was an issue. Either way, so I walked into my lessons. I was like, yep, I'm changing my major. Dropped my lessons class. I was like, yeah, this is gonna be my last day in here. I was about 2 months in, and I stumbled onto mental health because I was taking Psych 101. Took a Psych 101 class. I was like, oh, this seems pretty interesting. I was like, I make this my major. And it wasn't actually until I got a bit further in that I realized there was a difference between applied psychology and then research psychology. And so the further along I got, the more I was like, oh yeah, I definitely want to go more the applied route. I like working with people. This is more so what I want to do. But even then, like what therapy looked like in counseling, I didn't learn about what that was until closer to my senior year. And that's when I knew that I knew I had to go to grad school. But I only was thinking about the master's, which is only 2 years. So for me, I was like, okay, that's fine. I was like, I don't mind going get my master's. That's okay. So took a year off because by the that senior year, I had senioritis really, really bad. I was like, I don't want to go directly to school. It ended up being 2 years because I didn't realize is that to apply for the following year, I had to do it in the fall. And I was like, I just graduated May and I already got to start thinking about applications and stuff. And I didn't want to do that then. So that actually automatically pushed me back an additional year. So by the time I started my master's program, I was ready. Senioritis was good and done with. I was like, oh no, I definitely need to get back in school. I'm ready to get into what I'm doing. And also that 2 year period was when I was really living as a musician. And I was like, I see this. It is paying the bills, but this is not what I want to do, which was the other motivating factor. And so went into the master's program, and then all while it was honestly the first year of my master's program, I was not even thinking about a PhD. I didn't care to be a doctor. Like that was never my goal. It wasn't until one of my supervisors, she was letting me know. She was actually made a bet with me. She was like, "You're gonna be make a great PhD student. I was like, I'm not going to be a PhD. She's like, yes, you. I was like, bet. She's like, bet. I was like, okay. I lost, but yeah, it was honestly in talking to them and from a financial perspective, there was other doc students who had their masters, worked for a while, was telling me about different jobs available, and then also the cohort above us was preparing to go into the field, and they were talking about how much jobs were paying, and I was like, so you mean you graduating with a master's and folks are talking about 20K, less than 30K, and some of these jobs, some were actually less than 20K with a master's. And again, the counseling field, the master's is entry level. And so I was like, that's all right. And you had to work for about 2 to 3 years before you could get licensed. So I did the math and I was like, I could put those 2 or 3 years in a PhD program, add another one, get licensed at the high level, and come out making way more. Also, the degree was more versatile. People were talking about the amount of money I could make. They were talking about the places you can work, the things you could do. And so it allowed me to honestly do any and everything that I wanted to do without ever having to go back to school. And so I was like, okay, well, I'll just do that. And so that's how I honestly navigated the school piece, because it wasn't until later that I even realized I would be in school that long. But by that point, I was motivated to do so. So yeah, and the fact that to get through the PhD program, to be real honest about that, I was doing the countdown of like, I got to get through this so I can do the job that I want to do. So go ahead and keep pushing through. I did enjoy what I was doing, but PhD is no joke. Dissertation is no joke. And that piece really was a struggle for me. So honestly, it wasn't until about second or third year of my PhD program where I really started to feel like, yeah, I've been in grad school for a while now. And I'm a bit over this, and this is a lot. But I pushed through, and here we are.
So there's many different options you can go. You could have, since you want to do applied psychology, you could have done the PsyD. What made you decide to go towards the PhD? And you mentioned these people kept telling me, were there any key people who kept telling you, hey, there's more opportunities here, you can make more money here? Who were those folks?
Great question. So the way my master's program was set up, our clinical supervisors were the doc students in the program, like right above us. So I had direct contact, and specifically where I was doing my internship for my master's program, I literally was working side by side with the doc students. So I know pretty much all of them very well because we were all spending all our time together. One of the people who had the biggest influence was a couple of my supervisors, Chika Ofwani, Emily Bryant, one of my homegirls now, Ashley Brenton, Sierra Scott, and Neha. Like a lot of them really had a huge impact on, and Candace. And to this day, I still talk to all of them. Of them were also key people in just letting me know what the doc program was like, what it was like in the field at the master's level, some of the experiences they had, and also talking about the different things that I could do with the degree. And so that piece allowed me to really make a more informed decision as far as what I wanted to do on the PhD side. As far as deciding between PhD and PsyD, to be honest, I got a lot of biased advice. And so I really didn't even consider a PsyD, mostly because those same people that I was talking to were all in the PhD program. And so I only applied to other PhD programs. I didn't really even consider PsyDs. And the other reason, one, I didn't fully understand what the PsyD, like the difference between the PsyD and the PhD until after I got into the PhD. The other part of that, though, was the information I did know was that PsyD, unlike PhD, the PsyD was pretty much funded strictly by loans. So they were saying that you do get funding on the PhD side, but on the PsyD side, from what I was being told at the time, it wasn't really funded. And so that was pretty much another advanced degree that I would have paid 100% with loans. And so that was the primary reason I really just didn't look at PsyDs. Now knowing what I know, I probably would have applied for a PsyD program anyway, because even though they talked about the funding piece, I still had to take out some loans just because the funding I did get wasn't substantial enough to do everything I needed to do to navigate that PhD process. And so, and also there were some clinical skills and things that you learn on the PsyD side that probably would have aligned more with what I wanted to do versus the PhD program is more so combined with like research. It rounds you out because I had like research, teaching, supervision, and of course a clinical aspect, but they really make sure they covered the gamut versus PsyD focuses more so on like that clinical piece. You do get some of the supervision and the research isn't as heavy, and that actually would have fit better for me.
So you are, you come from a community that really a lot of school is not a big thing. So becoming a doctor, being in school is tough. So you have, your community, they say, why are you in school so long? You yourself are saying this is a lot of time in school. How did you cope? How did you handle family relationships, personal relationships, romantic relationships? Just because it's different when you're in school and your peers, people you graduated with, are far along in their career, earning a certain amount of money. So how did you cope with being in school that long?
That is a great question. I'm gonna start with that last piece you said. So my best friend is a CPA. He actually graduated a semester earlier than I did, but we came into school together. We met at undergrad. He went through, got his master's, and was working. He actually changed careers, or changed not careers, but he changed jobs like 2 or 3 times while I was still trying to get through grad school. He made more than I've ever made yet. Had his first house, had all these things. So I'm looking at all of this stuff happening while I'm still a grad student. He's talking about all these different things that he's navigating with life, and it's like, oh, I had to change jobs here and da da da. And he had already started making 6 figures and stuff, and I'm still like worried about which assistantship I'm about to get. And so that gives a little bit of insight of what it was like just from a peer perspective of like, so my peers who graduated and their careers start at either the undergrad level or they can start at the master's level, they're doing what they need to do. They're out. And remember, I took 2 years off, so he went straight through. And so again, people are starting further. I'm feeling like I'm just really, really behind compared to a lot of my peers who aren't in my field. And I had a lot of friends who were in like business and law and stuff. And so I was like, okay, that was one piece. The other thing is even for our grad program at the master's level and then even at the PhD level, it's not just school that makes this hard. You're working essentially 2 to 3 part-time jobs at the same time, which averages out to like 1.5 jobs. So I had like, I was a student, I had whatever assistantship I had at the time, and then I also had, I was a clinician while all of this was happening. And the only thing I'm getting paid for is the assistantship. So all the clients that I was seeing, we were not getting paid. I still had a full caseload, a full course load of graduate level courses that have papers that have to be written, tests you have to study for, all of this. So all of this is happening at the same time. And so that in and of itself limited the time that I had for like a lot of social engagement and things like that. So you mentioned dating and relation. And this is something I figured out. People, as far as relationships go, some people date. The people who really had relationships, the people who started dating pretty much like when they first got there. If they found their partner pretty early on, they tend to stayed with that person through the program, or they came in with somebody, and oftentimes they get married or whatever, and they be with that person throughout the program. Otherwise, it was a lot of single people in grad school, with a lot of delayed gratification, because it's like, well, I don't really have the space. And I was all intentional about not dating, because one of the things I realized, especially on the PhD side, was I wasn't going to be based in Georgia, because for internship, there wasn't an internship that I wanted, especially not in Athens, at least. So I was like, regardless, I'm gonna have to move. I'm not gonna be in Athens. The closest I probably would have been Atlanta, but I wasn't even thinking about Georgia placements. And for internship, I ended up in Texas. So for me, that was a pause on really trying to establish any substance, because I also know how I feel about long distance relationships. And so I was like, yeah, nah, I'm not gonna go that route. And so I decided to press pause on the romantic piece. As far as family relationships and things like that, I honestly had great support from family and peers because they understood that it was a process. Like, so my mom has her master's, and so she had been in grad school for a bit of a different process, but at least she had some understanding. But she asked a lot of questions, and so I wasn't getting the "oh, when are you done" thing. She was actually keeping track of like where I was in the process, and people were like really supportive in that front. So I can say for me, my village was actually supportive through that period. My friends also that I was talking about. So like I had, like I said, my best friend was in business. From a social aspect, and this wasn't until a couple of years into my PhD program, and I was really being more social because I actually had the time and money to do so, ish. He moved to Atlanta, and so what I would do is we really didn't have anything to do on Fridays. So once I finished my Friday stuff, I would go to Atlanta. We turn up like Friday and Saturday, and then I come back on Sundays. But he also was like, he wouldn't hesitate to like pay for a drink, or like if there was entry fee, he didn't mind like funding the bill for some of this stuff because he knew like I'm out here on struggle bus. And but that's also just the type of relationship we had. So it was like, okay, cool. Like you do what you need to do. You ain't got to worry about that piece. And also he had been to Athens too. And Athens is a college town for undergrads, and it's a place that has things. I'm going to be as nice as possible. It's great for the college experience, specifically the undergrad experience. In the grad school side, it's like, yeah, nah. And so that made socializing pretty much something that I either had to go to do to hang out with the friends that I had there, or because of the cohort model, a lot of the people in the program were a lot of the people that I was hanging out with. So we would do stuff locally there with just the people in the program. But that's honestly how I survived the process because going from the peer support part, when I was stressing out about things in grad school, my peers were 9 times out of 10 also stressing out about it. And I'm for this, UGA in particular had a lot of Black people compared to other programs. And that was something very unique about them because I've spoken to people and seen, and I've not seen other programs with cohorts that had as many Black people as they did, or people in color in general, to be just blunt about it. And so that was a huge benefit because then I could build village within village. So aside from just like we're going through grad school together, I also had Black people who were going through this together, and a lot of us were like first generation, either students, which is also a thing. Like this, we don't know what to expect for some of this, and other people are coming in like, oh yeah, my mom's a doctor, or I have this person, or whatever, or what that looks like. And so navigating a lot of those first time experiences and frustration with advisors or this class or stuff that we just don't understand, and just like I'm speaking plain English but people aren't understanding what I'm asking for, and like the frustrations of that, having people who are literally going through the same thing with you was a godsend. And so I'm honestly grateful for that. That's how I survived that, and then my friends and family being as supportive as they were. And thankfully, my mom had moved to Decatur, so like mom and them were in Decatur, best friends in Atlanta, so I had that escape for when I needed it.
How did you handle the financial aspect of it? So you're working a job, you're not getting fully compensated. So how did you pay rent? How did you budget? I mean, were there a lot of credit cards being used at that time? Like, how did that work out for you?
That's a great question. So I'll start with the masters. On the master side, it was 100% loans. I didn't even have an assistantship. And for those who don't know, assistantship is like a job you work in tandem with while you're in school that helps supplement. It'll take off. It's either 50% or 100% of your tuition, so you don't have to worry about that. Give you a stipend. That stipend not really a livable wage. I would go ahead and also say because I was making like ours was like $12,000 a year. I think the most I got was like 18 to 20. No, I think it was like 18. That was a housing one, which actually was great. But before I get to that, so my master's program, I didn't even have that. So it was literally long. So when it came to budgeting, what I did was I found a townhome that was a little bit more than what I was paying in Tuscaloosa. So I think my rent in that townhome was either, if it wasn't 500, it was like 600. And I calculated how much I needed to pay. I think I had to get a cosigner for my that first year. Um, and so I calculated how much that was. And what I did, I used my refund. I maxed out my student loans and used the refund from that to pay up until my next refund hit. So I didn't have to worry about rent every month. And then I also paid up my utilities because remember I took 2 years off. So I had already gotten used to budgeting my utilities and all this stuff. Like I had gotten really good with that. I was turning stuff off. Like I was, yeah. And then I'm a country boy, so I know how to cook. So I was cooking. So I knew some basic meals to get me through and everything. Also, when I didn't have time to cook, I I knew all the dollar menus and value things and coupons for like all the restaurants and stuff. And that's a benefit I will say of college town. So you can always find somebody who's doing like a little $5 thing here, whatever. And this was before inflation hit us even harder. So people still had actual dollar menus. So I could go spend $5 and get like enough to sustain me. Or I need a little biscuit place for breakfast. I biscuit and juice under $5. I could spend $10 in the day for food. And I was like, okay, cool. So I was like, I have this every day. This is what I can spend. And I had that budgeted pretty much to the penny almost to last me each semester because I had no money coming in my master's program, and that refund did not hit until December. Thankfully, the budgeting worked out because there was definitely some times when I got close to like November. I was like, well, we're gonna see what happens. And then that refund would hit, and I got very comfortable talking to my landlord, like, hey, so I'm waiting for my refund. When my refund hits, I'm gonna give you the rest of whatever you need. And they worked with me, and so thankfully, I did that for those 2 years. I got a reprieve in the Ph.D. program because of that housing assistantship. So because it was housing, they housed me. I actually got a townhome, thankfully, because of my position. And I was like, oh, thanks. So again, another home, didn't have to pay for it. And I also got a meal plan included. So food was now covered. That was also one of the highest paying assistantships on the campus. So I was making like, it was either 16 to 18,000, I think, a year, which again, with no bills, I had no utilities, no rent. The only thing I had was my cell phone bill. Food was paid for if I needed to, because they had plenty of cafeterias. And thankfully, the dining hall UGA actually had great food, so I didn't mind eating on campus. That was I was balling that year. I did a lot of stuff. I traveled a little bit. Oh, okay, we were good. And then after that, I had to let that assistantship go because it was also 20 hours. And I couldn't balance that with my program. And so let them go, ended up teaching. So that took me back down to 12. And so how I supplemented then was I did the 12, and then I also had to do some additional loans for summer. So for about a year or two, I did that piece. But I added in playing for a church. So again, those other skills that I had, like I said, I was a musician, and places always need a musician. So I was actively involved in the music scene. Somebody heard me play, connected me. Matter of fact, he was an alum with the University of Alabama, Roll Tide again. And we were in the same choir, just like 20 years apart. So that was another connection we had. And so ended up playing for his church for the last 3-4 years. I think we had 3 years I was there for 4 years. So the last 3 years of my PhD program, I played for his church, which was a great supplement. And then I added another skill. So after I learned how to do assessments, there was a psychologist in town who was paying grad students to do psychometry work for them so they could come in, do the assessment. So we did like the evaluations. He gave us a cut of it. And he was supervising us. So basically, I got to practice my assessment skills and get paid. So I had basically 2 part-time jobs plus my assistantship. And so that actually was how I was able to really survive, because had I not had that extra funding times have been real tight, and I was spent a lot more in loans. But that was actually how I survived the PhD program.
Yeah. So you're in your PhD program, and it could have been your master's program. When did you decide I want to work with this population, the population you're working with today? Or were you well into your career before you said I wanted to make a pivot?
Great question. During the training process, I was actually very intentional about working with as many diverse populations as possible, because what I wanted to do, I was like, I want to be trained broadly. In my program, both of my programs, my master's and my PhD, they actually trained you to be a generalist, is what they called it. And so it wasn't until after I had gotten into like internship and some postdoc work that I started to really figure out like this is what I want to really specialize in. But as far as during grad school, I was like, whomever, whatever, I ran the gamut. And that's actually been a great benefit because I can specialize now and say, this is what I work, but I'm also pulling skills from these other populations I have worked with. So I ended up saying definitively around, I think it was my internship year. I was like, yeah, I definitely want to work more specifically with Black individuals and the Q plus population, which actually is how I ended up back in Atlanta because when I was getting ready for postdoc, I was like, I want to be in a place. One, I wanted to live in the city, so it was between Atlanta and Houston. I still love Houston to this day. And actually, Houston was paying like 2,000 more. But the thing, Atlanta won because my best friend was still here, my family was here, and so I was like, and I had never actually lived in Atlanta. I had visited Atlanta a lot, but I didn't live there. So I was like, okay, I'll go back to Atlanta. Although Georgia also doesn't have state taxes, so that also would have been a nice little bump there. But either way, so I came back here, and the other part of that was the postdoc that I had placed me at Grady, and so 98% of the people I was working with were Black, and that's clients, peers, coworkers. Like it was just Black people, and I really spent a lot of time during internship focusing in on that part of my identity. And I was like, I've done a lot of things and been in a lot of spaces. I've also been the only for long enough. Like I did a lot of that in high school. I went to a PWI, so there were several classes where I was the only. Even in grad school, I mean, to an extent, like I was the only Black male in my master's program, and then another one came along. But PhD wise, like there was a lot of us that came through. Relatively, it was like 5, but still. So I had enough experiences of like being either one of the only or part of the few, and I wanted to be in some spaces where it's like we are the majority. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I came back to Atlanta, and every place that I've worked since then has been predominantly Black. All the people I've been serving have been predominantly Black. My coworkers have been predominantly Black, and it's been beautiful. And that's the work that I wanted to do, and that's why my practice is set up the way that it is. It's like I did all of this training. I've pretty much covered the gamut. So if you come to me, it's not like you're working with somebody who's like working with Black people. You're also working with a person who's had people who have schizophrenia, personality issues, the geriatric population, children, couples, families. Like I've done it all. And so I was like, when they come to me, if there's something that you want to work with, like some things I do limits, like I won't see that mostly because I know what it takes. But if you're coming to me, you're going to get some competent quality care from somebody who looks like you, not just a clinician who happens to look like you. And I was intentional about that. And that's when I made that pivot in internship. Yeah, I was like very intentional about that.
Go into a little bit more detail about your experience at Grady. For people who don't know about Grady, Grady services a lot of Atlanta. They have specialties. How was your experience at Grady, and what do you think made that more unique than other postdoc programs?
Great question. Point of clarity. My postdoc was housed in Emory School of Medicine, and the part, it was always confusing to say this. So technically, I was a Emory School of Medicine postdoc that was working at Grady. So I actually had the experience of both. And people don't also know this, but Grady's doctors 80% come from Emory, and the other 20% come from Morehouse. Um, but the Grady experience, that if you are a person who wants to experience true community work, I say work at Grady. That was one of the very much so, humbling is not the right word because I wasn't not like I was arrogant. It was in touch opportunities that I had. This serves people not only in the greater Atlanta area, but it's honestly people who are underserved. So a lot of times people may not have insurance, especially the people we're working with. They can't afford these services any other way. Also, they're going to be varying degrees of ability. So I had people who were unhoused. I had people who had been struggling with mental illness for years. Some of them had just been experiencing their first psychotic break. But a lot of people were, the average person who was coming in there was low S like that. And so for me, it really was like, I'm serving those people who honestly need this. And if this resource is not here, they would not have it. And so that was very grounding for me and fulfilling, because I was like, these are the people I really want to work with. These are the people I want to serve. And it also gave me insight into some of the challenges of a lot of community-based work, because some of the glitz and glamour of being in a private practice or some of these other hospitals is that the people who are coming in don't have some of the socio-emotional challenges. So they don't have to worry about their basic needs being met. They don't have to worry about how they're going to pay this bill, or how they're going to get X, Y, and Z. And so aside from the therapy piece, I also did a bit of, I guess you would call it social work a little bit, because I couldn't just address your depression. I couldn't just address your anxiety. I couldn't just address whatever this is, because it was being informed by the fact that my lights got cut off yesterday, or I only had one meal in this past week, or, like I'm on the verge of losing my house, or like we need to find a job for this, or this person just at the hospital need to navigate X, Y, and Z and get the resources for that. And I've also had the opportunity to go in the homes and work with their families and like educate them on like how to serve, how to best assist their family member who was struggling with mental health. And so that experience honestly is one that I cherish to this day. I would not trade it for anything. And I honestly would encourage anybody who's really wanting to do some real work to at least spend some time, do a rotation of whatever you can in a place like Grady or something community-based or underserved, because that really puts a lot of those textbook skills to the test of like, can you apply this when the person's not in this kind of laboratory perfect, like I got all these other things together, it's just like this one thing you focus on setting.
You don't think about that. You think, okay, if I help somebody, they go home, their house life is perfect. What happens when the water cuts off, when there's rats in the house, when I've been kicked out. I mean, that's big. All right. So transitioning. So now you're going to the VA. You're earning a full salary. Big money.
Yes. Yeah.
How did you think about making that money? You spent so many years scraping by, but now you're receiving a salary of somebody who's a doctor. What was going through your mind, and what was your plans with that money?
Oh, this is a great question. I was a quote unquote broke grad student ish for 8 years, 2012 to 2019, whatever that is. 7 years. Is that 7? Yeah, 7 years. And so when I started I started the VA in 2020. I was right, 8 years. Wow. When I got to the VA and actually started making a real person's check, one of the first things I did was I stopped with the delayed gratification. I was like, I'm tired of budgeting. I'm tired of coupon clipping and dollar menus and all this stuff. I was like, I'm now at a place where I can actually spend money and enjoy some things and buy these things off Amazon or whatever. It's not like, oh, let me wait for 2 or 3 checks to come through. Like, no, I don't have to do that. Like, I was getting paid every 2 weeks. Let's go. And so I fully embraced the I no longer have to wait until moment of it all. Now I wasn't a fool, so it wasn't like I went broke. I did though very much so indulge, and I fully acknowledge that I was not trying to save for real. I was like, because for me, saving was another thing of like you have to be real responsible and kind of restrict to this. And like I gotta cut this budget down. And I was like, no, I want to experience this because I experienced this at all for the past 8 years of my life, and so I did. And also at the VA, like you get ridiculous raises those first 2 years. So it's like, and you get a cost of living increase at the beginning of every year. So I started in October, and then like 3 months later, I got another raise. So it was great. So for me, that first year was definitely spent just not necessarily spending money, really just living for the first time as an adult who's making real money. And so that was really all I was focused on. I wasn't worried about retirement stuff. They automatically had that stuff set up, so I didn't have anything extra. Like whatever they signed me up for, I was like, okay, cool. I didn't miss that. I'll just take whatever's coming in, and then I was like, I, of course, already budgeted the stuff because one of the things my mama told me, and I sticks to me to this day. She's like, you always have to have a roof over your head. So my paid first. Like when I'm talking about like spending money, I'm talking about stuff that came after I had already paid my bills. So it was never a thing like, oh, my life's about to get cut off because I was partying. Oh no. And I was like, nah, party may slow down because I'm running out of party funds, but that's not the same as like I don't have. That's like no, my bills and everything are covered, and I got another check coming in. So like we're good on that. It's just like the money I was using after bills increased tremendously, and so that was I fully just ran into that, and I didn't budget in. Oh, I guess that is budgeting technically. So I kind of guess I lied a little bit. I was budgeting. I just didn't care about what I was spending after I paid my bills.
Makes sense. So you're at the VA, you're living life a little bit, but you're thinking about going out on your own. What were some of the, let's call it the legal steps? What were some of the financial steps that you took to open up your own practice?
So, great question. I actually started to go out on my own, and that was actually something I was going to do part time, mostly because I had decided I was going to buy a house. So after that first year of just out there living my life, I was like, okay, Atlanta's going to be home. I was like, I need to actually start saving money so that I can get a house and kind of plant some roots. Mm-hmm. And so I know I wanted to go into private practice eventually, but I was like, I'm not ready to do that full time because I hadn't done it yet. So my goal was to be at the VA for 5 years before I transitioned. Ended up going, because I hadn't done it, I'll do the short version of this. Because I had not done it, a colleague of mine, Candace, I mentioned her earlier, she knew somebody who had a group practice that was hiring. And so I ended up working for that person's group practice, and they were the ones who've been her name is Sophia, actually. I work literally in the building right beside her. She was really influential and monumental in me learning how to navigate private practice work because she was very transparent with her process. She showed me the system she was using. She talked about how she came up with her pricing. She was transparent about her journey that transitioned into private practice. And so she really is somebody that while I was working for her, and even now after the fact, was very open about like, this is how I did this process. She talked about her interview process. She had her contracts and everything together. She was like, is there anything you need? Feel free to use whatever you need to. And so a lot of the things and skills that I needed, I literally got firsthand from the person I was working for. And so that was how I was able to establish that piece. And it was motivated by the fact that I needed to make some extra money. I wanted to aggressively save so I could buy a house pretty quickly, which is why I ended up doing that, because with was being covered with what I was making in the VA, I was like, well, anything I'm making outside of here is all just extra at that point. And on top of that, I had more than enough from the VA. So I was saving some of my VA checks plus everything that I was getting from private practice work. which did allow me to aggressively save to be very transparent. And so that's how I ended up starting in that process and getting into private practice and actually learning about it literally by having her as a mentor.
And so give me the pros and cons of joining somebody else's practice, because I hear that a lot. I have clients, they join somebody else's practice. It can be extremely lucrative, but there has to be a give and a take with that. What is your perspective on, or is it all, roses and flowers?
Great question. So the give is anywhere between 35 to 40% that you're giving. Um, so that was one of the other motivating factors for me to really go on my own, because while I was definitely appreciative of her, and the split was actually fair for the field, I was only bringing in 65% of what I was making. Yeah, because my split was 35-65. What did I do? 30-70. No, 5-65, because of how much she had a price point. So like however much you're bringing in, that adjusted whatever your percentage split was. And also if you had an office or not, she really had stuff like outlined. I still admire her for that to this day. So that's one of the downsides, I will say. The upsides, honestly, there are a lot, especially if you have not done this before. If you're joining a group practice, things that are going to be established, they're going to have office space, and it's most likely going to be, and there's a reason why they have that split. So your office space is going to be paid for out of that. It costs to be on somebody's medical record keeping system. So if mine is Simple Practice, every person you add, there's a fee associated with that. So that came out of the percentage split that she took. She also had her so that my listing in one directory, Psychology Today, she paid for that every month. And so I didn't have about that piece. She also had several free directories that you could be listed in. She also, her website and everything is set up in a way that her business and everything was like one of the top listings. So the SEO, I think is what it's called. She had that wonderful. So a lot of that supplement about that as well. She had it so that there was a fund for some continuing education or trainings or whatever. There's a budget for that. Somewhere, I forgot exactly what the number was. I don't know if it was like $500 or $1,000 or something that you could use for like training and stuff. And so that again was coming from your split. And so it really made it worth it. So even though I wasn't getting 100% of my profit, there was a lot of benefits associated with it. Now you are an independent contractor, so there's not like insurance or anything like that included. But honestly, the money you make is based on the amount of people you see. And so it also makes money because again, she's getting that split, but there's also several things she's paying out. So it made sense. So if you've not navigated any of this stuff before and you are not business savvy, it definitely is very much so advantageous to join a group practice because you don't have to worry about any of that for real. There's somebody there who can help you navigate that. There's somebody who can honestly take care of a lot of the basic things you need to get started. They'll have that already ready to go, and you really just step in and start therapy work. And a lot of practices already have like established sources of clients or wait lists and things, which is another benefit of her practice. People would come in, and if like a therapist is full, she would also say like, is it just this person that you want to see, or would you be open to seeing anybody? And oftentimes there were people who were like, no, I want to wait for this specific person. It was like whoever's next available. And so you have clients that are coming in. So that was another benefit of that versus your own, you're having to do all of that work. So if you're not in a place where you have the time, energy, and effort to do all of that, a group practice is honestly the best way to go for that. And the split's not that bad, given everything that once you figure out how much it's actually costing you paying for it yourself, the split is worth it.
What is the hesitation for not going 100% in that split environment? Of course, you have to pay for your own health insurance, but I'm sure, as you know, you're probably making enough if you did that full time that you can really, it's just pure cash you're bringing in. So why not do that 100% of the time versus you going out on your own? And why not potentially do both, go out on your own and also be in the split environment with that ensemble practice?
So Great question. 9 times out of 10, you can't do both.
Okay.
Mostly because group practices will have some sort of non-compete. It's also very difficult if you're in private practice, the way that you're listed, I can't be listed under somebody's group practice and mine, because it's like, well, how would I then the I'm like an independent contractor. So even though I'm in her group practice, I'm the therapist. And so a lot of times when I'm listed in the directories and things, they see my profile. And so there's not two separate profiles of like, okay, I got some clients who are coming over here and some clients coming over there. And so that's part of it. But 9 times out of 10, there's also non-compete. So literally you can't work at a group practice and then have your own on the side, because it's like, well, that's a conflict of interest as far as like, that's one of the ways they navigate the clients and everything and the flow of that. So that's honestly the biggest reason that plays into that. The other part of it is it actually doesn't really make sense, because if you were going to go 100% full-time private practice, unless you were working for like another entity like the VA, so that would make sense. So I wouldn't do a group practice and private practice, because that's double. It's not even double dipping. This it defeats the purpose essentially, because it's like, I don't need to have this split if I got this over here. If you already have the mechanism and it's successful, just do the 100%. Like the extra, it's not even bringing in extra money, because I'm not losing money on the class that I have on her group practice, because I could just see them at my practice at my full rate versus like at the group practice for 65% of my rate. If that makes sense.
It does.
So if you're going to do that, it's only beneficial if you have a job like Emory, Morehouse, VA, something like that, where it's not in the private practice realm at all, and they also don't have a non-compete, because Emory does have a non-compete. VA did not. So you can do that at the VA and then do private practice here, and then you're making a profit, and that would be beneficial. And also for other people, whether you're virtual or not is a big thing. So you don't have to worry about office space if you're 100% virtual. And so then that really does make a lot of the profit, because the money I'm spending in office space gets deducted out of my profit and everything. But honestly, I got a great deal in my office, so I'm not really complaining about that. More people are wanting to come in anyway, and I actually prefer it in person. I have some colleagues who don't prefer it in person, and so they're doing virtual, and that works for them. And so that's honestly the bigger differences that I see.
Okay. So what is your trajectory now? So when you think about building wealth for yourself, you have a private practice. So part of your wealth is the equity in your business. Another part of your wealth is the distributions you're able to take for your business. How do you see yourself building wealth for yourself or some level of financial security?
So for me, I go back to that piece I talked about with the budgeting. I set up what I needed. I actually calculated more than basically what I needed, based on how my lifestyle that I wanted to live, which is why I said the number originally. If I had 10 full rate clients in a week, then I'd be good. I typically average more than that. So what I'm doing now is, because on average I see more than what I basically need to live, that I am able to take and do all the different things that I learned about over the years. So something that I did, even though I didn't have the money to do this, was I was watching YouTube videos about saving. I still follow people to this day. I have several people who are in finance. I'm soaking in a lot of the information that they're talking about. And so I have a plan in my head. It's not even loosely. I have a plan in my head of how I want to execute that. And I'm taking the funds that is above whatever my basic cost is to then execute that plan and build that wealth. The part of that is also based on the time frame of like, I've only been in private practice full time since September of 2022. So I'm not even a full year yet. And so some of that startup cost is still happening within this first year. And I also added a piece to my practice. I do assessment now. those who don't know, the materials for assessment, which is another reason why you should probably join practices for different things. Those materials are expensive, like thousands and thousands of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's taken a little to save the money necessary to get what I need to actually get all the batteries and everything established that I needed. But I've pretty much done that except for like one or two now. And so I'm going to start at the end of August adding that piece. And so I've actually had a lot of money going out, more money going out than I will after everything's fully established. And so while I do have this concrete plan of what I want to do to save and build wealth, it's a bit delayed. But basically, to answer your question, I intentionally made a plan of like, this is why I'm living here. Anything above this is going to go towards wealth building, savings, and honestly retirement. And to be quite frank, I really can explore some more options than what I had planned because private practice is more lucrative than I thought it was. Like I knew private practitioners made me. I did not realize how much more you can make in private practice doing less work. Like I'm nowhere near full time. Full time is 40 hours. I figure 40 hours a week. I'm averaging 15 and making more than what I made at the VA. So that's put some things in perspective. And granted, I'm also spending a bit more, mostly because, like I said, I'm still establishing some things in place. But I also my practice is growing, so I'm expanding a bit. It's my first year out, and I'm already getting a bigger office. I'm looking to add on some people, and this is within my first year of being in private practice. So the benefits are there. It's just I'm actually gonna have to tap into some more resources and figure out how to maximize that extra piece that'll be coming in once I add those additional streams of income.
What is the number one advice you would give somebody who's a psychologist wanting to go out on their own? What is your number one piece of financial advice you would like to share with them?
Get a CPA. We are not trained. Nah, just bluntly, get a CPA. We are trained to do therapy. We are not trained to handle a business. So if you have the time to do like a little business minor and you want to learn that, that'd be great too. But otherwise, make friends and network with either find you a CPA, make friends with somebody who's in the business field and finance, other entrepreneurs, because that's the skill set you have to build. Like it is literally a business, and we don't know how to sell ourselves. We think of that as like this bad thing. It's like, oh my God, you have to be able to do it. You have to be able to talk about yourself. You have to be able to advertise, put your skills as a product. And that's literally a paradigm shift for how we're trained. That's not the world that we're in. In order to really monetize that, you have to think in those terms. You have to be intentional. Like I will also say, I'll speak for me. There was a lot of things that I was giving away. Like for instance, there was an organization that hit me up to do a training, and I was like, in my mind, I was like, oh yeah, I would love to do a training, but I thankfully, because of the type of organization it was, I definitely had the foresight to ask, like, okay, I asked my colleagues, so how much do you charge to do this type of training? Because in my mind, I was like, I mean, okay, sure, I'll just do it. But because of the network of people that I've had, I have gotten information over the years of like, you need to be mindful of like, these are things that you can charge for. These, like, you don't want to just be giving this information out because you're then literally working for free. And we've been in school too long. We've worked too hard to just be giving this information away. And I think that's the paradigm shift that happened in the private practice because literally you market all of the skills that you have. And so if that's not your bread and butter, if that's not something that you've done a lot of, then 100% find your CPA, find your business friend, find you something in that field, someone in that field, so they can help you maximize that and really learn how to navigate that space, because that for me has been a godsend.
And the last question I'll ask is, think about your younger self in Alabama in 10th grade. What advice would you give that young man?
10th grade me. Oh, 10th grade me. I would tell 10th grade Jesmond, Um, you are more valuable than you give yourself credit for. And the things that you are even at that age aren't common. And you need to maximize on that. Like you need to step into the fact that you are operating at a level that is honestly not common. It doesn't matter that a lot of your peers are doing something similar academically. You're also amongst the top 10% of your class. You are highly involved. You are a person, you're president of various organizations and stuff, managing and taking care of your grandfather and all these things. And that is something that is very unique. And step into that and own that and know that you are just as valuable. Actually, not even just as, like, we don't have to be humble. You are more valuable than you give yourself credit for. You are doing more than you're giving yourself credit for. And you don't have to keep comparing yourself and feeling like you're behind the curve because you're really not. Um, Own that confidence, really find that confidence and live in that, because it's going to really be beneficial as you're navigating college. And it's something that you figure out a little bit later. But if you figure that out before you get into college, the sky will honestly be the limit, because you do great things and you're already doing great things, but you don't really recognize that because for you think it's like just normal average. You're not normal or average. You're above average in literally everything. And you have to own that and step into that and walk into that. And yes, you've got messages that you have to be twice as good. Like you have to work twice as hard just to be half as good. Here's the thing, you're already doing it. And you're actually more than half as good. Like you're still above average. So you've internalized that message. You don't have to keep pushing it out. Just own the fact that you are doing what you need to do and you're checking all the boxes, you're doing all things. Own that, walk into it. Also, um, talk to anybody who's been in college, find some college friends, talk to the people that you know ahead of you, those old band people. Ask them what that college process is like, what majors like. Talk to them about their process, because your school counselor is not going to do it for you. And you are not prepared and ready for that, and there's not enough conversations about that. So definitely leverage the friendships that you have, because you are connected, and talk to them about some of those things that you don't really think about, like what does college look like? What is the major? What is the application process beyond just like ACT and SAT? Like, what are some of the things I really need to think about like being a college kid? Um, yeah, and also just own who you are.
Love that. I love that. All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Jesmond Fair, for joining us in Building Wealth and Mental Health. I've enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you for having me.